Okay. So good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to our Sunday Forum for this morning. My name is John Humphrey. I'm part of the Sunday Forum committee, and we've put together a wonderful slate of programs. And this is another in a series, and we have more coming up. Just a couple brief things. I'm learning more about how we manage the technology around this. So it turns out that we not only have Zoom available, but we also have live stream available. So we may have people here from both in a Zoom meeting room with us, and also we have people attending by live stream. If you're attending by Zoom, you can ask questions of our presenter. And if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A portion of the Zoom screen, and that will be relayed to us on our screen here in the room, and the presenter will be happy to answer any questions you might have. If you're attending by live stream, you won't be able to do that. You'll just have to listen to the other questions that other people have to ask. But if you get us a question after the fact, we may still be able to get it to Thom and have it answered for you. So that's how that will all work. Thom asked if we could please hold questions till the last 10 minutes of the presentation, because he has a fair amount of material to cover. One other thing I wanted to say about, before we get into the formal introduction here, is just at Plymouth, we've been doing a lot of talking lately about intersectionality, that it doesn't make sense to talk about immigrants and the immigrant situation without talking about global economy, US economy, racism, classism, all sorts of other isms, sexism. They all impact each other and are all interconnected. We have not really looked through the lens of global justice yet. So Thom will bring us another intersection to look at these problems through and maybe shed some new light for us. Our presenter this morning is Thom Haines. He's chair of Mayflower UCC's, got to get this name right, Global Justice Advocacy team. He's led delegations to Guatemala, participated in delegations to Honduras, Haiti, Colombia, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines. So I think with that, we'll let Thom get started. Please join me in welcoming Thom Haines.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for being here today. It's great to be at Plymouth. As John said, I'm from Mayflower UCC, just a couple miles down the road, and probably if we were looking for a church that's most similar to Mayflower in the world, is probably Plymouth. So I think we have a lot in common. We have a lot of places where we basically stimulate each other's thinking. We have a lot of people in common. I believe you have a staff member who is very closely related to our team lead minister. One of our team lead ministers from Mayflower was on the staff here. So lots of connections. I've been here many times. I used to come here every month, actually, for the Minnesota Conference Global Partnerships team. We met here. So very familiar with this building, very familiar with the congregation, and delighted that you're here. A choice to come to a program like this. I'm not sure why you're here, how you decided to come, or how much the content made a difference one way or the other, but it's not an easy subject to necessarily even think about when we think about especially the U.S. role in terms of what's causing forced migration. That's what I'm going to be talking about. So maybe some of you know tons about that. Maybe some of you don't know too much about it. I'm going to assume that people don't know a lot about it. I'm not a subject matter expert on this, but I've been to Guatemala many times, and I know lots of subject matter experts. And so I'm going to give you really my experience, and hopefully this will be a continuation of the intersectionality conversation that John was talking about, and spur us to think about things in maybe a different way. How many of you were here last week for the Celtic spirituality? Yeah, I watched it online, and what a fantastic introduction to today, because when you're looking at indigenous spirituality in the case of last week from Iona, but amazing complementary similarities between indigenous spirituality anywhere I've been in the world, and certainly in the Lanka people in Honduras and the various groups of Mayans in Guatemala. the care for the earth, the deep spirituality, the daily living out of their spiritual lives, lots and lots of commonality. So if you're here last week, you are well on the way to actually understanding what's great about living in this world, and also the problems that we're facing as we all work together to try to make this world to be more like the world that God intended. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about just who I am to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. Talk a little bit about the values that I think we share together, and then also a bit about. I'm just going to dip my toe into the immigration mess that, in terms of U.S. immigration policy, that's obviously a several week session all by itself. But it's good when we're talking about forced migration, which is what I'm going to be talking about, and that's how I characterize it. We're talking about migrants who are coming to this mess at the U.S. border. So I think we need to touch on that just a little bit. Diane and I, that's my spouse Diane there, right here in the second row. She's the head of our Mayflower immigration team. We just got back from the border. We were there in October, and I'm astounded always when I go there. I keep forgetting how bad it is. I mean, I've been there many times, but I just keep forgetting how bad our immigration system is. So I'm going to remind you of that just a little bit too. And then I'm going to talk about what I'm actually supposed to talk about, the root causes of migration as it relates to particularly Guatemala and Honduras. Those countries aren't unique in any way. The same story could be told from almost any place in the whole entire world, but those are the ones I'm familiar with, and those are the ones where I have the experience. That's why I'm focusing on that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about something that's pending right now in the United States House of Representatives, which actually would be a direct solution to some of the issues that we're facing. And it's a bill that's sponsored by Representative Ilhan Omar. She's not the author, but she's a sponsor of it, and it has to do with how the U.S. Exercises its role relative to the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, who fund a lot of projects that the United States claims are helping people in Honduras and Guatemala. In my opinion, you've already gathered, not so much helping sometimes. So who am I? Just quickly. Well, I went to Guatemala with Sister Parish in 1989 as part of a Lutheran congregation. And what I tell people is, after that trip, it was in the middle of the civil unrest there. There were guerrillas all over the place. There was army presence everywhere. Naive to not even begin to describe what I was like when I went there in 19. I had no clue. My Spanish is horrible now, and it was even worse then. And my jaw dropped on that trip, and I haven't recovered since. Because what I basically learned on that trip was from person after person after person, and now I've heard that from not only many people in Guatemala, but also countries around the world, that the perception of how the U.S. functions in the world is very consistent in every country except for the United States. And I began to learn that in 1989. I also learned, I mean, the racism, intersectionality again, the racism in Guatemala is absolutely horrendous. The indigenous people that we go there to meet with and support are at the bottom of every rung that there is. And I learned that there too. My timekeeper here is telling me that if I don't hurry up, I'm not going to get past point 1, let alone point 55 that I have no outline. So I am based at Mayflower, the Mayflower Global Justice Advocacy team. We don't do schools, we don't build wells. What we do is basically go over and over and over again to Guatemala, sometimes Honduras, sometimes other countries, and basically hear the stories of indigenous people there, hear what they're experiencing at the moment, and then also recommendations that they have for what they want us to do in the United States. So that's what we do over and over and over again. Listen, support, solidarity. Sometimes we bring speakers here. We do advocacy also as they ask us to do that. I was on the Global Ministries Board, national board related to the United Church of Christ for many years. I used to be an assistant Carver County attorney. I retired in October, so I'm a lawyer. Was a former ELCA pastor before that for 17 years. And I'm also one of the executive producers on the 2013 documentary Gold Fever, which is being shown in this very place today at I think 12:15. So which will be a visual representation of some of the things that I'll be talking about. One of the things that happened in a trip subsequent to 1989 was made me think really a lot more about the role of media in terms of what the narrative is that we hear in the U.S. about what's happening relative to migration and also just foreign policy in general. And we were at a village. We were watching it's called a consulta, where indigenous people are required by internet or countries are required by international law to consult with indigenous populations before they rip up their villages for a mine. And so we went to witness this consultation. And there was a Wall Street Journal article about us going there. And the article was saying how this group from the United States came and tried to influence the people to vote against the mine. They voted against the mine 99% to 1% or something, and that was our fault. And we were doing that improperly. We came in on a van like 1 minute before the vote. We didn't know those people at all. It was a flat out obvious intentional lie in a Wall Street Journal news story. I thought, oh well, this is something to pay attention to, isn't it? Okay. Values. When Jesus, his very, very, very first sermon, you remember what he said? I have come to bring good news to the poor, right? And so that was the center of his ministry. And as opposed to what's happening with let me say it, white evangelicals, for instance, there's a lot. Good news to the poor is a whole lot more than you're going to heaven after you die if you confess Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. Good news to the poor means liberation and justice now. And it's clear, I think, that that's what Jesus meant. We could have a whole session on that, couldn't we? Also, Jesus prayed that we may all be one. And I've come to believe that means, not just all Christians be one, although that is the United Church of Christ logo on the logo, and it's our motto, whatever. But and I realize Plymouth is part of the conference, not part of the UCC. Don't have time for that conversation either. But anyway, but I've come to believe that we may all be one. It has been influenced also by my experience with Mayan spirituality, which is not just all Christians are one and not just all humans are one, but also we're one with the mountains, we're one with the rivers, we're one with the oceans. We're all dependent on what all of us are doing. So that's one of the values that I bring to this analysis in terms of what our role is. It's my faith-based obligation to welcome the stranger, clear in all of the Bible. One value that I also bring is that an immigrant or a forced migrant is not a different kind of person than I am. The boundaries that make one person a migrant and one person a citizen, those are imperial boundaries that were set somewhat arbitrarily based on all kinds of issues other than who are different kinds of people. Immigrants are the same kind of people that you and I. And I find that it's one of the most disturbing things in the mainstream media is to portray migrants as though it's this other totally group of people. It's different than those of us who happen to have been born in the United States. People deserve safe homes to live in and stay in if they want to. They shouldn't be forced to move by various and sundry forces. Development should not be imposed from the outside. The communities themselves should have a huge voice in what that means. And migrants who enter the United States should be treated humanely and almost never, in my opinion, be detained. There's almost no reason for that ever, and it happens all the time. Okay. So 1 minute on the mess that is the U.S. immigration policy in the United States. I'm just going to really give you a couple quick examples. One of them is we think our system sometimes is normal. It really isn't. Here's what Canada says to people who are thinking of immigrating from Guatemala to Canada. If you're thinking of moving to Canada from Guatemala, you are not alone. Every year, thousands of Guatemala citizens start the process of moving to Canada to start a new life. Guatemalan citizens tend to choose Canada because as a Guatemalan, your chances of successfully moving to Canada are high. Then we have our Vice President of the United States going to Guatemala and saying, don't come. Very, very, very different framing of how our two countries see that. One of the immigrant families that Diane's team is working with at Mayflower, or one of the young men, is here on what's called a U visa. Do you know what that is? Have you heard of that at all? It's a U visa is something that the government gives to someone who is a victim of a crime in the United States, and the government has decided that they need that person to testify. So they give them this U visa, and that has a path to citizenship connected to it. Now, how long on average do you think it takes for someone to become a citizen of the United States who has been granted a U visa? In other words, he's already been vetted by the government in this case, they decide they want him here. Actually, they need him for the prosecution of the case. 25 years on average it takes to become a citizen of the United States. That's insane. We went to an immigration removal hearing over at Fort Snelling not too long ago. This is a deportation hearing of somebody that Mayflower has been supporting for 6 years. She was an employee of the United Nations. She was here on a tourist visa. She got told by friends back in Congo, where she's from, that her friends were being disappeared and killed. That if she came back, she was in the same kind of danger because of her political activity. You could not find a better asylum case. 6 years later, she's in immigration court with the federal government attempting to argue to the judge that she should be deported. That's insane. That makes no sense. Okay. So that by way of introduction, right? What we're looking at. So, and those are our values. So what's preventing this world that we all know is possible? A world where we're all valued, where we're all respected, where we're all entitled to clean water, a safe home. What's preventing that? Well, here's the spoilers. So we can explore this the rest of the day if we want to. But in my opinion, what's really causing the problem are corporations seeking profits supported by the United States government. That's the nutshell right there. That's what's happening. So I'll be giving examples of that. But there are many projects that are happening in Guatemala and Honduras related to big agriculture, sugarcane, African palm, also mines, also hydroelectric dams that don't even begin to benefit people who actually live there, manufacturing, the maquiladoras on the border. All of those things are coming together to force people to leave the homes that they want to stay in. They don't want to leave their homes any more than you and I do. I mean, I suppose 1 out of 100,000 might want the adventure that's talked about in the mainstream media and make a better life for themselves. Well, yeah, they want to make a better life for themselves because they can't possibly stay where they are. Within the last month in Honduras, there were 2 young men who were killed, and based on an article in The Guardian, which I highly recommend The Guardian to find out what's happening in terms of U.S. foreign policy, by the way. So 2 young men were killed, and what was their crime? They were opposing a mine, an iron ore mine, actually, in Honduras. And so they were coming home from their day jobs, and they were killed. The government said that they were robbed, but guess what? They still had their cell phone. They had cash. They weren't robbed, and so that's happened within the last couple of weeks. Let's look at Honduras a little bit more in terms of just historically. So we'll do Honduras first, and then we'll do Guatemala. In Honduras, there was a coup in 2009. Are you familiar with that at all? Yeah, so, to some degree. Okay. So the president's name was Zelaya, and he was one of the elites that was the elites of the country, but he very radically decided that he wanted to, bump up some of the rights of the poor and give them a little bit more land, a little bit more to make their life a little bit more palatable. So there was a coup, and he was taken out of the country. There were articles about that in the U.S. media, but here's a fact that I find that a lot of people don't know, and I don't know if you know this or not, but how many of you know that there is right now today an active U.S. military base with U.S. military personnel in Honduras? How many of you know that? Okay, 2 of you. Yeah. So yeah, and the president Zelaya was taken through that base on his way out of the country after the coup. So there is no way that the United States was not supporting that coup. There's no way the United States wasn't supporting it. The United States sort of said they weren't supporting it initially, but then that changed, and so we became one of the only countries in the world, really, to not call it a coup. The reason we didn't call it a coup was because if it was called a coup, then we couldn't fund the Honduran military and the Honduran police anymore, and we needed to do that to protect the corporate interests in Honduras. Now, I don't have time to prove all that. I'm giving you basically very, very, very high level opinions. Clearly, you can research it as you choose, and I'm happy to talk with you about this as long as you want, anytime you want after the session today, in the months, years, and decades that follow. Because I don't think we're going to solve it tomorrow or in decades. So, okay. So in 2018, I was part of a delegation from all over the United States, 50 of us from lots of different denominations, 3 of us from the UCC actually in Minnesota. And one of the things that we did was we went to the U.S. Embassy to give them our opinion as, in terms of what we saw when we visited the countryside. This was at the same time that the really illegally constituted new president was going to be inaugurated in Honduras. And there were hundreds of people closing down highways, burning tires, because they said this election was stolen. It actually was stolen, and in Honduras, and so they were protesting, and they were fighting for their lives. And one of the I'm going to read you what I was. There were 50 of us. I was one of the 10 that actually spoke to the embassy staff, including the charge d'affaires that was present at the time. And here's what I said. I'm a lawyer in a county attorney's office just outside of Minneapolis and a member of Mayflower United Church of Christ. A couple of days ago, our delegation spent hours standing by highways in and around El Progreso. I was amazed and appalled at what I saw. Dozens of very young Hondurans, some possibly as young as 13, were willing to risk their lives to protest the recent election of Juan Orlando Hernandez. They faced police and army units armed to the teeth with, and in some cases, their parents on the sidelines supporting them. There were chants of "Fuera Ho," which is Juan Orlando, get out of here, and a passing parade of supportive vehicles, including Dole trucks. I was also inspired on the one hand and appalled on the other by how encouraged the young people were to see us. When we from this delegation of witnesses arrived, the youth at first were afraid, thinking we were reinforcements for the armed forces. They were happy and relieved to see it was us. They looked to us for protection. They felt safer because we were there. It's extremely unfortunate that police and military that should be protecting them are instead potent symbols of repression. So there's your intersectionality again. I mean, obviously we see similar things in the United States. And actually, in my opinion, if we look to Honduras and Guatemala, we can see where things could go if some of us don't stand up for the right thing. So they've been dealing with this forever. And then I concluded, I said, the young Hondurans are seeing a very different Honduras than apparently seen by the U.S. State Department and U.S. mass media. What is the truth? Is the recent election one more slightly flawed step in a slow progression to a functioning democracy? That was the United States State Department's take at the time. Or is the obviously stolen election a potentially mortal blow to freedom in Honduras? I've concluded that the mobilizations we witnessed are key components of an existential struggle for the heart of Honduras, and I wonder what you think. Well, what they said, I've been to the embassy twice in the last 10 years, and they basically say what you'd expect them to say, that we're doing what we can to help. We're funding development projects. We understand that things aren't perfect, but they're making progress toward democracy. And our delegation of 50 people and anybody else that we talk to there does not agree that actually is the case. So that's a little bit about Honduras. So moving on to Guatemala, there was a coup in Guatemala. How many are aware of that? Okay. There was a coup in Guatemala in 1954. And the people that we relate to, again, most of the people that we relate to when we go, they're almost always indigenous. They are pretty much always poor. And they tell us that democracy in Guatemala has never recovered to the point that it was in 1954. There was a president, his name was Jacobo Arbenz, and again, he wanted to improve things for the sake of the poor people in Guatemala. He wanted to take some of the land that was controlled by United Fruit, that's as in Chiquita Bananas, and he was offering to pay United Fruit the amount that they claimed it was worth when they paid taxes on it, and United Fruit didn't like that. They had friends. John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State at the time, had been connected to United Fruit. Also, Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA at the time, had been connected to United Fruit. And so, in that particular case, it wasn't just a U.S. supported coup. The CIA actually threw him out of office, and a long string of dictators that did what U.S. corporations wanted to basically preserve their economic interests. So that was the coup in 1954. And our as I said, our contacts there say we've never gotten back to that level of democracy since 1954. To them, that's like yesterday. I mean, it wasn't a long time ago. And a lot of people in the U.S. don't know that happened. So the last time we were there was in 2019, just before COVID. And our purpose in being in Guatemala was to really look at the root causes of migration from the point of view of the people who live there and the people whose family members were leaving to come to the U.S. And so one of the things that we did was there's a lake, Lago Izabal, in eastern Guatemala, and we were led in a kind of an all-day field trip along the shore of that lake, where our friend Maria was telling us the history of what happened in the various villages and along the lake, and how people that she knew were experiencing what happened and why people were leaving. And she said a lot of things that were extremely interesting and helpful, I thought. One of them was that in around 2006, 2007, the tin mining company, which is it's a Canadian mining company based in Canada. However, guess what? It trades on the U.S. stock exchanges, and global north companies, I don't really care where they're headquartered. It's all kind of part of the same global economic system. So they came into the village, they burned down all the houses, the 100, because they wanted the land for the mine, burned down the houses, raped 11 women, and killed 1 man. And amazingly and almost miraculously, that case is now pending, being heard in Canadian courts. For the first time in the history of Canada, and I don't think this has ever happened actually in the US, the Canadian courts have said, if you're alleging that Canadian companies are raping women and killing people and illegally driving them off their land for the sake of a Canadian mine for profit for that company, we're going to hear that case in Canadian courts. Well, it's been years later, and it still isn't resolved to the frustration of people. But these indigenous Mayans from that area have been flying up to Toronto to testify in court there in terms of what happened to them based on what the company did. So we learned about that on our trip along the lake in eastern Guatemala. She said, also, see those that sugar cane over there to the left? Well, that used to be villages. They were driven off of their land. See the rubber plantation over here? They were driven off of their land. See the African palm? They were driven off of their land. But the most prominent feature was this massive tin mine, which used to be basically people living there and farming there. So she said, we have no choice. They said, when our land is taken away from us, and she cited 96 accords that gave them that land. But the court system is very corrupt, and obviously the people who have the money can control that. And so her assessment was it was totally illegal. But she said, when we don't have our land, we can't live. I mean, we can't. There's nothing we can do. And so somebody has to go find some money somewhere. And a lot of people end up trying to cross the U.S. border. The woman that spoke to us, Maria, I mean, she's in and out of hospital. She has massive health issues. And she says that's true for all the people involved in the struggle, because it's hard to deal with that oppression, like day after day after day after day. She was asked by 3 political parties to run for mayor of that particular municipality, and because she's a popular figure in the area. And she basically said, nope. She said they're all founded by narcos or agro or mining money, and they're all corrupt, and I'm not going to run for mayor on behalf of any of them. So that was her lack of confidence in the political system in that particular area. We heard from a man named Cristobal, and he said, rich people know that their greatest strength and our greatest weakness is our poverty. And so there's a water shortage. It's a very, 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 very difficult struggle. And here's what they told us. And here's what I'm telling you today. We hope that your visit today, we hope that you thinking about this today, will have some echo internationally, because they certainly don't let our voices get out. So that's what they said to us. And we've heard this in Guatemala over and over and over again. They said, we don't want your help. We don't need your help. We want you to leave us alone. So we don't need you. We've been living on this land for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And the other thing that they challenge us on that I have to think about occasionally, we were watching a video that from one of our first trips to Guatemala with a friend of ours who was a student at Augsburg here from Guatemala. And the narrator in the video was talking about the haves and the have-nots, that her trip to Guatemala made her more aware of the haves and have-nots. And our friend said to us, who are the haves and have-nots? I mean, who are you talking about? And to us, you ask almost anybody in the United States, when you're talking about the haves and have-nots, what do we mean? People who have money and people who don't. That's what we mean. But that's not how she saw it. He said, we're not even poor. She said, we have depth of spirituality. We have our community. We live in a beautiful place. We have all the food we need to eat. We're not the have-nots. And we've heard the same thing from the Garifuna people who are African Hondurans on the north coast of Honduras on the Caribbean, whose land is being threatened by a resort. They're kicking them off that land to build a resort so that people from the global north can come and party on what has been their land for generations. And they say, yeah, we don't consider ourselves poor. We consider ourselves to have everything that we need. And we think you're the poor ones. I mean, you're the ones that lack of spirituality. You're the ones that are chasing things all around. You're the ones that are working 12-hour days, apparently, is what we hear. And for what purpose? We think you're the poor ones. So that is something that is stuck in my head as well. Okay, so that's my So in their question, when will the day come when HUD Bay is held accountable? And that's the question that we need to ask ourselves too. And obviously, the Canadian court system, the U.S. court system, I'm pretty sure that the Fisher people from the Exxon Valdez spill have not been compensated yet, because Exxon has dragged. Remember that? How many years ago that was? Appeal after appeal after appeal after appeal, and the Brian O'Neill, who is the head of the unit from at the time Faegre Benson law firm downtown Minneapolis, said he never really realized how much money could grind the U.S. legal system to a halt. So it can be difficult. Okay. So we talked about Guatemala a little bit. We talked about Honduras a little bit. Now let's just briefly touch on the media. And when you read stories about immigration, the narrative has been set. They almost always say people are fleeing violence and poverty. That's almost always how they start. They almost never talk about the actual immigrants themselves, do they? I mean, why are they coming? What all the stuff that just this couple of stories that I mentioned, you virtually never see that in the U.S. press. And I was reading it. There was an article in the New York Times on December 13th of this last year. It was talking about the new wave of immigrants coming from Nicaragua. And this is a New York Times article with 5 reporters on the byline. 5 reporters. New York Times reporters are not stupid. They're some of the best in the world, really. And this is what they said. This is a quote from the article. The spike in the number of Nicaraguans crossing the border illegally is likely the result of smugglers. Eventually, the migrants will face removal proceedings in immigration courts. The spike in the number of Nicaraguans crossing the border illegally. They're presenting themselves at the border and asking for asylum. That's not illegal. But that is a pretty big mistake in terms of because that's exactly what, if you look on the State Department website, it says if you're requesting asylum, that's what you have to do. You present yourself at the border and you say something is happening to me based on a protected class that you define in your law, and I'm asking for sanctuary in your country, and then the process starts in terms of a hearing. But the New York Times just skips right over that and says, number one, that they're crossing the border illegally, which is that's just not true. That's an untrue thing to say. And eventually the migrants will face removal proceedings. Well, that's if their asylum claim fails. Now, admittedly, the system is set up to make the claims fail. And so that's one other story that your group can talk about at another time. But it's not a foregone conclusion that they're going to end up in removal proceedings. They have asylum claims. Okay. I've been complaining about the media just a tad today, but there are some like breaths of fresh air, and the U.S. media that I think gets the story right about migration more than any other is the L.A. Times, and here's an op-ed in the L.A. Times. This was in response to Kamala Harris's trip to Guatemala. When she said "do not come," Harris signaled disdain for the rights of asylum seekers under federal and international laws, and dashed many people's hopes that she might reform U.S. foreign policy in the region, which has long involved a contradictory combination of humanitarian aid and support for militaries that attack human rights. There is the crux of the issue right there. The U.S. supports humanitarian aid. Charity is fine, justice not so much. That's the shorthand that I would say. And so the LA Times goes on, Harris traveled to Guatemala to address the root causes of immigration, such as poverty and violence, but she made no mention of the U.S. role in those conditions, such as training right-wing death squads, financing coups, or investing in extractive and exploitive industries. So these industries, the hydroelectric dams, the agribusiness, they're funded by the World Bank and by the Inter-American Development Bank. Under the guise of helping the people who live there, which they don't do. I think the average wage in Guatemala now is like $3 a day, and multinational corporations that are based in the global north have a high interest in keeping wages that low. They also have an interest in continuing to take over the land and extract the resources, steal them. The indigenous people would say that we talk to, and they benefit almost not at all from any of those projects. So we can change that narrative. And how can we do that? Well, the first thing is there is a part of my daily meditation practice is to sing to myself this part of the Talmud. I'm not going to sing it to you today, but maybe you know it. Do not be daunted. Basically, do not be daunted when you look at the enormity of the world's grief. And what's the solution that the Talmud gives us? Do you know? Anybody know? Do justice now. Love kindness now. Walk humbly with your God now. That's the solution. That's the solution. So how can we do that? Well, and then it goes on to say that basically you don't have to finish the work. In fact, it's impossible for any of us to finish the work, but neither can you abandon it. So I think that's kind of hopeful, right? Yeah, we aren't obligated to finish the work. In the United States, we're used to winning. And we think if we can't win, it's not worth the effort. I mean, it's really kind of sad. So on one trip to Guatemala, one of the people on our delegation asked one of the indigenous strugglers who'd been camped out on this mine site for months and months and months. There was a protest that was trying to stop this mine from coming in, and the person from our group, I kind of winced when the question was asked, but said, I mean, is it really worth it? Because are you ever really going to ever win? And here's what he said. He said, we know that there's no bottom. It'll continue to get worse if we don't fight. They will have us as absolute slaves. I mean, $3 a day it is now, but they would rather have us be slaves. So he said, we have to continue to fight. So that I've learned so much in going to these countries over and over and over again in terms of perspective as to what's possible. And also, yeah, focus on what I can do and focus on the truth. I could be totally wrong in terms of what I said today, and I hopefully you'll contact me and let me know where you think I get this wrong. I'm not. This isn't propaganda time. I'm trying to tell you what I actually see as the truth. And if you see a different truth, or if you see nuances, this wasn't very nuanced because it was pretty high level. But I'm interested in actually all of us who have the kind of values that we want a world where everybody is respected, everybody has water, everybody has access to food, everybody has access to healthcare, and what we need to tell the story correctly about what's preventing that, and how we get to our dream, God's dream of justice on earth. So let me know if you think I'm getting this wrong. So finally, we have this bill, and this is the bill pending in Congress. And it's called, okay, get ready for this, the Shishoy International Financial Institution Reparations Act of 2022. I'm going to read that again. The Shishoy International Financial Institution Reparations Act of 2022. And I'm just going to focus on this one thing that we can do, because this is going to be pending for a while, I think. And it addresses exactly the issues that I've been talking about so far. Shishoy is named after a dam in Guatemala. We've been there many, many times, and it was built in the early 80s. As usual, there were people living along this river for hundreds and hundreds of years. The corporation and the supporting Guatemalan government and the supporting U.S. government wanted the people off of that land so they could build their dam. They didn't really want to move, and so there were horrendous massacres, babies' heads bashed on rocks, women raped and killed. Like 500 people in a period of 2 years were killed, basically to get them off the land so this dam could be built. So what's happening now is, after 82, however many years later, there's a bill pending in Congress, and basically it's seems to me pretty simple. It's saying that U.S. representatives to the World Bank and to the Inter-American Development Bank should not be funding projects that create human rights abuses. That's the bill. It's got a snowball's chance in hell of passing ever. But that's all it's asking to do. And so I've got like quite a few pages of text here, and that's what I want to do. So far, again, I've seen nothing about this in the U.S. media in terms of this bill even being introduced. By the way, I've asked you several times if you've seen something that happened, but how many of you know that Representative Ilhan Omar went to Honduras and met with the new president? John, good for John. Yeah. She went there. She issued a press release. She has all the photos, like of her sitting with the president, of what they agreed, what they're asking the U.S. to do. Wasn't a word. I have seen not one single word about it in the Star Tribune. Senator Klobuchar did have a 2-page article, including pictures this big, about the bill that she was introducing to protect us from chests of drawers falling over on us. So, did you see that one? Yeah. So good for her, right? I mean, nobody wants chests of drawers, and we don't want manufacturers, but I don't think manufacturers are too motivated to build chests of drawers that fall over on people either. So anyway, but not a word about that. So she had a town hall in St. Louis Park, a packed room, speakers from Chicago. It wasn't a word in the media. Okay. So, by the way, this bill has been endorsed by the National United Church of Christ and also by Global Ministries, which is a joint ministry of the UCC and the Disciples of Christ. They were some of the very, very, very early endorsers. Okay, that's what I think about the root causes of migration and what's causing it. John, who's the author of the bill? The author of the bill is I have that right here. Garcia, right? Yeah, Jesus Garcia. Yeah, Jesus Garcia from Chicago, from the Chicago area. And I think there's a handout in here that actually has their press release. I think that you have, so you can look at those details. Yeah, we have 5 minutes for questions.
We have a question. Please let me bring you the mic so that the remote audience can hear you.
Questions, responses, arguments?
So we keep hearing about the push factors. Obviously, you've talked about the push factors. Are we doing anything at all, the United States, to help with the push factors? Seems like we're doing a lot of things to make the push factors worse.
Well, there are people who try.
But I mean the government. Really?
In my experience, and again, I don't read everything, so I could be wrong. In my experience, the State Department has a high interest in saying that what's happening at the border is a border problem. They aren't really very interested in the push factors you're talking about. And so if they can solve the border problem, that's Biden's political problem right now, is the accusation of open borders and all that. So what he's done is he's pushed it back to the Guatemala-Mexico border, right? And so they basically contracted out. So if the U.S. if the problem is at the Guatemala-Mexico border, then the U.S. State Department doesn't have anything to explain, because nobody in the United States is paying attention to the Guatemala-Mexico border. So I don't think a whole lot is done in terms of the push factors. In fact, in my opinion, the overall incentive of the global economic machine is to keep things exactly the way they are. The system isn't accidental. It's ever since 1492 it's been like this, right? And so there's high and I for sure am a beneficiary of it. I mean, my pension is based on the same companies I'm complaining about, right? I'm benefiting from that profit. So I don't think a whole lot is being done. They talk about development, and so what they say is that by giving money to build a hydroelectric dam in Guatemala, they're helping the economy. That's not what the people there say. And a good friend of mine is now she has a PhD. She's Honduran. She has a PhD in political science from the University of Minnesota and is now a professor at the University of Toronto. She says, if the people were actually in favor of those kinds of projects, there wouldn't need to be a security funding proponent in every single project. Every single, when the United States gives aid, and said, why do you need security if you're doing something that the people want? She also said, you have something, Diane, but she also said another thing, which is, I should have mentioned probably earlier. She says, virtually nothing happens in Honduras without U.S. approval. Virtually nothing. We got a military base there. I mean, so I don't think a lot is being done from, I don't think, because the incentive is to keep things the way they are. Diane? You need a microphone. Oh, what? You don't have the microphone. The microphone's back there. So I guess you're going to be after that.
Talk like this?
Yeah,
Sure. Well, because they can't see you online and they.
No, it's good. It's good.
That's okay. About, I'm gonna say 7, 8 years ago, whenever Pastor Families was taking place and buses were going to Washington, D.C., I was on one of those trips. And there were maybe 200 of us from across the United States who met as a group to get ready and get prepared to go talk to our Congress people. A senator came in, and I wish I could remember his name, but he was there to answer any questions. And so I was the first one to ask the question, and I said, and this was after years of going to Guatemala. Well, when you're writing a bill about comprehensive immigration reform, which is what they were working on in those days back in like 2012, 2013, do you look at the root causes so you can adapt your bill can include that? And he said, dismissed me by saying, you wouldn't want to talk about that with your Congress people. And then he moved right on. So that, and I told Steve Phillips, our representative, about that, and he said, well, now you know what I have to do. So pushback from Congress, not so much.
I've always come to the conclusion that the crux of the matter is greed, and that there are those who actually believe greed is good, but greed hurts the greedy as well. And what I'm hearing you say today is that we have to keep striving for justice in the world, given the condition that it is, not so much to move forward, but to not make things worse.
Yeah. And corporations are designed, I mean, they're for the purpose of profit. So they're going to do what they can do, right? I mean, that's you can't even really fault them for that. So it almost has to be government regulation to make things better.
I'm really sorry, we're out of. Please feel if you'd stay and
Sure,
answer a few more questions afterwards. If somebody has a burning question they need to ask you, that would be greatly appreciated. Could we have a round of applause for our presenter, please? Thank you so much. Just a reminder, we have Thom was one of the executive producers, if I have this correct, of a film called Gold Fever, which we will be showing today at the Film Club, starting sometime between 12:15, 12:30. Feel free to get lunch, bring it down to Jackman and watch an excellent film on gold mining in Guatemala. I was very excited. I found out online that the mine that is the subject of this film, which is the company has a horrific record of human rights violations. And I found out the mine has been closed. And I thought, well, great, something positive happened. Well, no, the mine ran out of gold. And so the mine closed. Guatemala has been determined to be one of the most gold rich countries in the world right now. And there are how many existing mines? Several hundred.
They told me that these that are involved in mining resistance of some sort.
Okay, 200 communities involved in mining resistance currently, and new corporations old corporations, but looking at opening new mines today. So it's not even though the film has been out for a while, the problem is very much ongoing. So please come and feel welcome to come and check out this movie at noon today. And just next week for Sunday Forum, we have Sam King coming and talking about her new book. And so she'll be talking about writing as a spiritual practice. And then at noon on next Sunday, then she'll be in the art gallery area talking about her new show and book that's a collaboration with an artist. So please come and join us next Sunday for Sam King, who I think almost everybody here knows is somebody who is near and dear to us, Jim Gertmenian's wife. And so someone who has been with us for years and years and has been gone for some time and is now coming back for a visit. So please join us for that. Thank you so much. Okay.